Michael Daves, a really great guitarist and mandolinist, centered and based out of New York. So, how old were you when you started playing music?
I think I was about 4 when I started. My parents started me on Suzuki piano lessons.
Okay.
So,
How old were you when you started playing guitar?
I think I was about 10. Picked up the guitar. Um, uh, because of rock music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just wanted to play pop and rock stuff.
So, how were you introduced to bluegrass then?
My parents play banjo and fiddle, so it was in the house, and they would have music parties, and it was just around, and my mom, she played banjo and guitar and sang, but then when I was probably about 7 or 8, she took up the fiddle, and so as she was learning the fiddle, before she was playing fiddle tunes slowly, and I would hear her practice and absorb a lot of these tunes that she was working on. Because with the Suzuki piano, you're doing a lot of there's some ear training involved.
Yeah.
So I could sort of hear the melodies and kind of they'd sink in pretty well. And so as she started getting her fiddle skills together, she and my dad would jam on banjo and fiddle in the kitchen. And back when I picked up the guitar, they started trying to encourage me to join in and back them up on fiddle tunes and songs and whatnot. And so
how old were you when you started playing bluegrass then?
Gosh, I'm trying to remember. I'd say probably about 12 or 13, I would guess, when I started, playing fiddle tunes with my folks, and I was self-taught for a while. Again, I was kind of more into like rock guitar, and I had rock bands and stuff. But then at some point, I decided to take lessons, and I took briefly guitar lessons with this guy Jim Tolles, who lived in Atlanta, and he was in that band Breakfast Special with Andy Statman and Tony Trischka and Kenny Kosek and Stacey Phillips and Roger Mason. So he played fiddle, mandolin, and guitar, and started doing a little bit of traditional music with him, just more general guitar stuff. And since guitar wasn't his main focus, and I was getting into it, he sent me to study with this other guy, Ray Chesna, in Atlanta, who is from the New York area, and also had connection to the New York bluegrass scene. He had a bluegrass band in the 70s, I believe, 70s and early 80s, called Wickers Creek, that at one point included a 16-year-old Bela Fleck.
Really?
Yep. So when he was a student at LaGuardia High School, and he was playing in this band with Ray on the weekends, and they play all these gigs upstate, and he used to tell stories about them, like driving, back to, they drop him off the subway at like 6 a.m. on Monday morning so he could go to school.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know something about that. Trying to get around and being a part of the music, and you still gotta be at school and whatnot. So for me it was less intense when I was in high school. We had a great bluegrass club up the street from my house called the Freight Room in Atlanta, where they had a bluegrass night every Thursday with band on stage, and there's a jam as well. So it was at this old 100-year-old railroad depot, and so people, when the weather was warm, people would go jam out on the train platform. And
was it active?
Yeah, it was great. And then about once a month or so, they'd get a touring act coming through Nashville. So I'd heard a lot of great people in the early 90s. There are, Tim O'Brien and the O-Boys, John Hartford, Del McCurry, in probably about 1992, like in a very small place, because, but with, the band with his sons, and You
That
know,
was very cool.
Larry Sparks on the tour where he announced that he had found the Lord and would no longer be playing in establishments that served alcohol.
Wow.
Let's see, Claire Lynch. Saw David Greer and Butch Baldassari, Norman and Nancy Blake. Trying to remember who else, but I mean there were a bunch of good shows coming through there. But the problem is I had at least I always had like at least in my senior year of high school I always had calculus tests on Friday morning, so
Oh.
it was always a big conflict of how much bluegrass can I do and not flunk out of calculus. So
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
anyways, but yeah, Ray was a really good teacher, and he did bluegrass, but really kind of introduced me to like a pretty broad spectrum of American music, and he was actually his specialty was really in like fingerstyle blues and ragtime. He was into like Delta and Piedmont blues, really good finger picker, and also into like Western swing, and
Yeah.
so he introduced me to Bob Wills and all the blues players, and also like newgrass stuff. And he had a great CD collection, like
Yeah.
hundreds of CDs, and so I'd go to my lesson every week, and then he'd let me take home a stack of
That's
CDs,
cool.
which I would then like dub to cassette tape
Yeah.
and listen to in the car. So Ray was a great source of just learning about a lot of different music, and he was a good teacher and kind of got me started in at least in the direction of like music theory, improvisation, and like and then at some point I started getting more into jazz, which was we had kind of started doing some swing stuff like some Charlie Christian and
Yeah.
Bob Wills and stuff like that, and then he sent me on to his teacher that he had studied jazz with, this guy Bob Shaw, who was like a really good straight ahead jazz guitarist who did all of the chord melody stuff. So that was kind of what I was doing kind of in the end of high school, and that was partially spurred on by the fact that I had friends that I'd played rock music with
Yeah.
had like started getting into jazz, and they were studying hard and learning how to play over changes and learning songs out of the real book, and I wanted to be able to
Yeah.
hang and participate, and it was
Yeah.
like totally mind-boggling, and it was not easy for me at any point, but I started developing those skills, and eventually by the time I was kind of heading off to college I was kind of getting more and more into jazz, but that's kind of what I focused on all through college and after college, but still playing bluegrass whenever I could find anyone to play bluegrass with,
Yeah.
which wasn't always easy once I left
Yeah.
home and that jam.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I moved to New York, and I was probably about 27, where I was around people who, and not,
Played more.
where there were
Yeah.
jams, and so that was really I really missed that in my life. I hadn't been there since high school, and so I was really, really happy to end up here in New York, where there's such a vital jamming scene,
Mhm.
and also had kind of left jazz behind and kind of gotten hardcore back into bluegrass. But
Yeah. What would you say drew you to bluegrass when you were younger,
well, when I was younger,
or like first starting out?
yeah, it was. Well, I was a little reluctant because it was something my parents did,
Yeah.
and so I was, I wanted to rock out and write my own music, and this was like the early '90s and so there was that whole. I mean, I was like really into like REM,
Mhm.
like kind of getting this like some kind of college and kind of indie rock of the '80s and early '90s, and then in like the early '90s you had this whole like grunge thing just kind of came like a bulldozer through the music scene, because like
Yeah.
before that there was like in the '80s, late '80s up through like 1991, like there was like the whole like hair band thing, so like a lot of the
Yeah.
popular music was like Guns N' Roses and Poison
Yep.
and Def Leppard, and then like pop stuff like Madonna, and I mean now I love Madonna, but like I was like wasn't interested in like pop music at that time, and then so like I remember like sitting around talking with my music friends, like, well, like, what is there even to be into? I mean, there's like hairband music, there's pop, and then there's like metal,
Yeah.
and then we were just kind of like scratching our heads. So it was like, what is there like for us, And then like grunge came through, and
Yeah.
and just was like, whoa. And all of a sudden, it was this sort of like cultural renaissance. So I was, definitely influenced by that, and at least briefly. Because
Yeah.
then I kind of started getting more into traditional music and then jazz, but that was sort of what I was into at that time. But it's through working with Ray and just him just exposing me to all this amazing music. I heard like Robert Johnson and Big Bill Broonzy, all the blues guys, Etta Baker, John Jackson. Like it was just like this stuff was so profound. I remember hearing, especially the old blues guys. I'm like, oh wow, this has like some of like the grittiness and rawness that I like about, say, like grunge music.
Yeah.
That was appealing, but it's old, and you have the sense that like, oh my gosh, there's like all this music out there, and if you can just get your hands on it. Of course, this is before the internet and like Spotify, and so like you had to like find people who had the recordings and like borrow them, and like seriously, I went through like hundreds of cassette tapes and just like copying anything I could and like listening to it and absorbing it. But it was more of a mission to like learn about music at that point. So I think it was kind of that was kind of part of it, is like the discovery in the sense of like, oh wow, and like I started kind of getting a sense of like how I was into history too. I almost like went into like musicology, and I like the history of music, but like it's really kind of starting to see like how American folk and popular music developed through the 20th century. That kind of became a point of interest. So I wanted to know about all of it. And bluegrass. Back to the question of how to get bluegrass, or I thought it was like. I did like that there were these jams going on, and like there were some really great pickers and singers, and I liked that it was like a community thing that people like got together and did. And so part of my interest in bluegrass was just hearing it and liking a lot of what I heard, but part of it was just like I wanted to participate, and I like the idea of just getting together and jam with people, which I still do. So that's and then the fact that there was like a bunch of like really good, I had access to a good jam and like good performers that like I got to see up close and meet, and just to be part of that. Like I never really went to festivals until later, but like just that one place, the Freight Room, plus like all my parents' music friends that was kind of how I got a lot of got into music.
So what would you say draws you now, like to keep playing or motivate you?
To play bluegrass music? Part of it again is the community aspect. I love that it's a vital scene where people get together and play, and there's this social aspect, and but just as far as like as a performer and like artistically, I feel like I like traditional songs. I like songs that are old, been around for a while, not necessarily because they're old, but I just feel like there's something, there tends to be some potency associated with songs that have like stuck around for a long time, like through multiple generations, and there's like often like something compelling about it that like helps like reflect whatever people's experiences are at a given time, so that's like a little different than like a lot of like say singer-songwriter music. Not that some of it is not timeless, but like people like write original music, oftentimes it can be like so much just about, oh, it's my experience, and this is how I'm feeling, and that's cool. Like I feel like people will be listening to Joni Mitchell 100 years from now and still like having their minds blown, because like there's something about like her writing and her performance that does communicate across all sorts of probably the ages. We'll
Yeah.
see, but I'm willing to bet on that.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I listened to her a lot. My mom listened to her a lot when I was younger,
Mhm.
so I grew up listening to her a lot.
sure, yeah. I mean, some music is just it's just what people are bringing to the performance. But I mean, I think with bluegrass music. I mean, you're not just interacting with like a performer or a performance with a song. You're interacting with the tradition,
Mhm.
and this game of telephone where songs are passed down and changed a little bit and
Yeah.
the folk process or whatever. But I mean, often the old songs are they can be really powerful. I like that kind of connection to where things have come from, and songs that are not like too specific to like personal experience that you can't like put your own experiences
Yeah.
in them.
Yeah.
I find a lot of these songs are just good templates for putting whatever you're feeling and experiencing. I just like for bluegrass is that it's exists as a fully acoustic music. Now
Yeah.
people don't plug in sometimes, but it's conceived as just music, like sound to make in a room, and
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
like certainly as a singer and a player, developed a pretty loud
Yeah.
style, and I often like singers like blues and bluegrass who like really like when you like in a room with them and they sing, you just kind of feel it in your bones,
Mhm.
So there's that, just the style favors, or at least has a little space for singers, particularly who are like just have a very visceral presentation of what they do. They're like more croony singers as well. I mean, like Alison Krauss has got like a
Yeah.
much more reserved and quiet voice, and I mean she's an amazing singer. But she's not a belter. But I'm talking
Yeah.
about like the Hazel Dickens, Bill Monroe.
Yeah.
Those people who just pitch it to the back of the room, and so I like that, and I like acoustic instruments, and just as far as playing, that just this interaction with between the player and the instrument, and that you're responsible for getting all of the sound out of it.
Yeah.
You're not. There's like a limit to how much you're relying on technology. I mean, you want to have like
Yeah,
a good instrument that you relate to and express yourself on, but it's not like computer music or doing with a bunch of pedals, which I also like, but it's like
Yeah.
a different mentality.
Yeah.
But just the kind of the here and now aspects of playing acoustic music live with people.
Yeah.
You got some good songs in there. There's some open space for improvisation, and and the whole community aspect. It's pretty compelling.
Yeah. So I've heard you talk a lot about like Bill Monroe and Tex Logan. How would you say they've influenced you as like a musician?
Oh, well, Bill, gosh, I mean, as a singer and a mandolin player, he's the prime example of someone who just sings to the back of the room and is like
Yeah.
just got so much visceral power in the singing. And Bill in particular, like his voice is crazy.
Yeah.
As far as like all the different things that he can do with it, like
Yeah.
the dynamic range, the way he just seamlessly blends in the head voice with the chest voice, and he can like just, I am a poor wayfaring stranger, like just very kind of like delicate and kind of bring the listener in.
Yeah.
And then he'll like belt something out and like yodel, and
Yeah.
he's just so powerful and impactful as a singer, and just like so strongly emotional. So yeah, I mean his singing is so remarkable to me. But then his mandolin playing, I mean there are kind of three main kind of elements within Bill's mandolin style. One is that he's tending to draw on his vocal melodies, like he'll play here I'm in I have a pick. I've been a poor really great at communicating like vocal-esque ideas on the mandolin.
Yeah.
But then the second thing is that, and this is kind of where Tex Logan comes in, is that he's got such a strong sense of shuffle, you know, like the way he like, you know, he like there's that old time square dance shuffle, like. He's got this, you know, he's using a pick to try to sort of emulate the things that a bow can do, that a pick can't do, but you like, just that process of trying comes up with like such a rhythmically propulsive style. And, you know, you mentioned Tex Logan, who is really one of my favorite bluegrass fiddlers. And Tex, and one of the reasons why is that Tex, his fiddle had like a very strong bow shuffle.
Yeah.
You know, he was like a very aggressive sense of accenting, you know. Yeah, you know, it like. Yeah, again, you can't shuffle with a pick like you can with a bow, but you know, just it's so, you know, rhythmically strong and kind of in your face, and so I think I'm sure that's why Bill liked Tex's fiddling so much.
Yeah.
And, you know, they were kind of peas in a pod in that regard. And then, anyways, back to as far as Monroe's style, I mean, he's really the best blues mandolin player too, you know. He, you know, all that syncopation and stuff. So I mean, that's like such a trifecta of elements that yeah, it's just so yeah, very compelling. So.
Okay, so this is kind of like an odd question. If you could play with any musician, like living or not living, who would it be?
Oh wow. Just one?
You can pick one.
Well, I mean, Monroe. I mean, I'd love to sing with Monroe. I mean, people, you know, talk about just, you know, how freaking loud he was and how, you know, you can tell, like, just even from recordings, like how, you know, again, there's that visceral power that he had. And I mean, one of the things I love about harmony singing is you just kind of standing there next to someone and like the way the voices are blending and colliding, and you know, like you just get like a real strong singer. You know, someone like I mean, for like Jen Larson singing, she's got a real, you know, she's always got this like a heat-seeking missile for that like vocal blend and kind of hitting those big high notes, and you know, Bill was the greatest at that. So I think that experience of singing harmony would, you know, be hard to argue with that. As far as guitar player, I mean, Clarence White is. I would say, I hesitate to say he's an influence, one of my biggest influences, but he's, I think, one of my favorite guitarists to listen to, because of his unique sense of timing. And I've, despite really liking his playing, and I've spent very little time like trying to transcribe or emulate what he does, because I hear that and I'm like, you know, I could like figure out what the notes are, but like it wouldn't come out sounding like him.
Yeah.
Just because his timing is so unique, so particular, and you know, just his flow of ideas is just so kind of off kilter and interesting that I'm like, I'm just gonna like sit there and appreciate what he's doing.
Yeah.
And just kind of let it be a puzzle.
Yeah.
But so, given that, I think I would really like the experience of playing with him, just to get a you know, a real time sense of that timing. You know, you know, the subtleties of timing are really, you know, you have to really understand it. You have to like play with, you know. I remember I got to fill in on guitar for a gig with the Traveling McCurries several years. That was before they went with Cody Kilby as their full-time guitar player. For a while, they were just kind of had just a cast of a bunch of different guitar players that they would call upon. and I got to do that once, and I remember the experience of, playing with those guys and like trying to lock in and just like really being right there with their particular sense of timing was like, whoa, that's a whole thing. And I'd listened to it so much, but to actually like be there and play and have the experience of having to interact in real time is irreplaceable. So I think about that with Clarence, man. Like, gosh, what would that have even been like? And I'd love to like trade licks with them.
Yeah.
Because all right, well, you can tell we're in Brooklyn. We got the car alarms going off, but also, I mean, Clarence was such a great improviser, and like his melodic ideas and rhythmic ideas were really complex and on like such a high level, and certainly compared to like nearly any other bluegrass musician I can think of. I mean, there's some really great improvisers like Stuart Duncan is incredible. Will Thiele is he can just play 18 times through a tune and like just constantly be doing new stuff or recycling the same ideas in interesting ways. But most bluegrass players aren't like great improvisers because I think there's like so much it's so much part of the style to like kind of rely on licks, and stuff that kind of come up along, and if you're not sticking to the melody, then it tends to be like just kind of a collection of well-trod licks is kind of what you hear a lot of. But like Clarence he was just working on a different level as far as his musical ideas. So, anyways.
Okay, here's another weird question. But if you could describe bluegrass, like the music or the scene, in one word or phrase, what would it be?
I'd say community.
Okay.
It's so much organized around people like sticking to the standards so that you can like go anywhere you go, you can play bluegrass with people that you've never met before because everyone knows the same stuff. So, it's this kind of like the sense of the canon and like how the protocol of playing the music. It's all kind of it's referring to the community of bluegrass musicians that's out there, and like so much of the musical decisions exist just to facilitate being able to just show up and play. So I don't think that's necessarily how bluegrass music got started. But I think that would be the best word I could think of, for the world, the bluegrass music world as it exists, as a tradition, like as a living tradition.
Yeah. So how long ago did you move to New York City?
Well, it was 2003, so it was like 16 years ago, something like that, right?
15 years ago.
Yeah. So I was in Western Massachusetts.
Okay, cool.
Before that, I went to college and was there 8 years all told, and decided to, try to move it on up.
Have you seen the scene evolve here since you've been here?
Oh yeah, it's been in flux. When I arrived in 2003, one of the biggest figures on the scene was this guy Greg Gehring. I don't know if you've met or heard of him. Greg had spent a lot of years in Nashville. He played fiddle with Jimmy Martin. He put out solo records, wrote songs. Multi-instrumentalist, played guitar, fiddle, played all the bluegrass instruments. And it's just a really very powerful singer and just character. And he had I think come from Nashville to New York in like I want to say the late 90s or something, and then he had done a lot to sort of revitalize the bluegrass scene here. So he held this he had this thing called the Alphabet City Opry.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Which was at this place that used to be called 9C, which is in East Village. 9th Street and Avenue C,
Yeah.
and then the same place was then later called Banjo Gems, and now it's closed and they don't have music there anymore. But yeah, so he had this sort of like review where he'd perform and like get other people, you know.
Mhm.
The Sheriff Uncle Bob
Yeah.
was
Talks a lot
a
about
big
it.
part of that. Yeah. So yeah, Greg was kind of a big deal, and the combination here of like, you know, having Greg who had, you know, come from, played with all the greats, you know, all the living greats, the greats who were living in the 90s. He had,
Yeah.
you know, played with most of them and really had absorbed a lot about of kind of like the deep and kind of gritty and kind of stirring aspects of the tradition. You know, it wasn't a museum piece, you know.
Mhm.
So he inspired a lot of people here, and then the combination of that in the movie "O Brother Where Art Thou," which kind
Yeah.
of like brought a lot of like general kind of culture-wide
Yeah.
awareness to the music. I think so that was going pretty strong when I arrived, and yeah, when I came here, it was already kind of on the way up. You know, there were like players moving to town, and a couple years
Yeah.
after I got here, Chris Thiele
Mhm.
moved to town. I met him when he was here checking out New York to see if it's a place where he wanted to live, and he actually we met at Sheriff Uncle Bob's Jam.
Oh, cool. At the
And-
Bag It In.
Yeah, the Bag It In, yeah, and hit it off, and then he decided to move. So I mean, I kind of for a while I was kind of in a role of trying to like convince all the musicians I knew to move to New York, like it was the place to be, you know,
Yeah.
and it kind of was.
Yeah.
You know,
Did
so
many
this-
of them move here?
yeah, well, all the Punch Brothers lived here
Oh, yeah,
at one
that's
point,
right.
and then there were, you know, a bunch of other kind of musicians with that scene. They were here, and like people moving down from, you know, graduating from Berkeley,
Mhm.
coming here, and then so I would say it sort of peaked in the years from like, you know, 2010 through 14,
Mhm.
15, I would say, and then I mean, rising rents
Yeah.
is just like New York is just in Brooklyn especially. You know, it used to be a much more affordable, and it's just gotten
Yeah.
more and more expensive and harder for artists to be here, which is really unfortunate. And then simultaneously, Nashville started getting cool.
Yeah.
Well, cooler. You know, like it used to be that like Nashville did not have good coffee,
Mhm.
cocktails, farm to table restaurants, or any of these sort of like
Yeah.
Brooklynian amenities, and that, like people who were kind of, you know, into that stuff culturally, you know, wanted to be here because
Mhm.
that's like where, you know, all this is where all the good stuff was, and like all the
Yeah.
artists and bands that were kind of doing interesting things. And so, you know, as kind of cultural things kind of get hot like that, then the you know, the money starts pouring in,
Yeah.
and then the people, and it's gentrification basically. You know, we're all part of the gentrification, but then
Yeah.
also the victims of it.
That's true.
And so a lot of musicians have moved to Nashville, a few have moved to LA,
Mhm.
and other places, a little bit to Austin. But so, you know, it's clear. I mean, I would say that the scene right now is like a little there. It's less focused on like there are a bunch of like professional musicians living here, but I think that in the wake of like all, you know, those sorts of people, you know, the Punch Brothers, you know, Aoife O'Donovan,
Mhm.
you know, and all these other kind of Berkeley and NEC graduates, you know, that like I think
Yeah.
created an atmosphere of like sort of inspiration,
Yeah. I'll
and so I think the jamming scene now is stronger, but it's kind of more
Yeah.
focused towards, you know, kind of you know, beginner through semi-professional
Mhm.
musicians. There are fewer like touring, you know, people who like tour nationally living
Yeah.
here than there were 5 years ago
Mhm.
or 10 years ago, but you know, it's still pretty strong, you know.
So there have been a lot of younger musicians, it kind of seems, playing and living in New York. Why do you think so many younger people are playing? Because it's traditionally more like, I guess older people are generally playing it. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there are, you know, some more younger people, but I think part of that is just the bluegrass tradition in general has been around for long enough that you're getting more and more like families who like already are into bluegrass, and they have kids, and they raise their kids around the music and going to festivals and stuff like that. And so, you know, near New York we have Gray Fox, which is you know pretty family friendly festival. So I think that it's probably the factor of just bluegrass as a musical form has been around for long enough that you get more and more, you know, parents raising kids in bluegrass families, and it's something that happened in jazz in like the 80s. You know, starting more like child prodigies like Wynton Marsalis as a 16-year-old, just blowing and Christian McBride. You know, people just kind of blowing everyone away. You know, but they just kind of grew up on the music. You know, and with parents who kind of revered the musical form as, you know, canon, and so
this will be my 16th Gray Fox.
Oh wow, yeah, okay, yeah, you're you're prime example of that. Yeah, see, I didn't grow up going to festivals. I mean, there's music around, but you know, as a teenager, I was sort of like longing to connect with, you know, other, you know, people my age who played music, and I kind of felt like there weren't any. I
haven't found many.
I mean, I was like hanging out with like old dudes with banjos, you know.
Sounds quite familiar.
Yeah, but you know, with the festival circuit, you know, I think I know you've connected with a number of, you know, people in your age group, and it's great to, you know, have this sort of, you know, friendships, and everyone's like learning and getting better and inspiring and challenging one another, and you know, you have friends that you see when you go to the festivals, and it's not just hanging out with your parents and their friends. So
that's always a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So what drew you to New York City for music?
Well, you know, honestly, it wasn't the bluegrass. My wife and I moved down here. I mean, she was at that time working as a graphic designer, visual artist, and where we were in Western Mass, there just like wasn't enough work, you know, kind of on a high level, and so if you wanted to be somewhere, you know, where there was just kind of, you know, more opportunities, and I'm like, okay, you know. And, you know, as a musician, you know, moving to, you know, living and working in New York is sort of like, you know, the gold standard. You know, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. And that was, at that time, getting back into bluegrass and old-time music. But I didn't realize how much of a scene there was in New York. So. But we just moved here for, you know, greener pastures and opportunities. And, you know, again, like the early 2000s where it was like a really fertile time. There was like so much great rock music and interesting, you know, art and performance art happening, like, you know, back when Williamsburg wasn't like all finance bros. You know, there was, you know, bands like the Yeahs and the National were just getting started, and, you know, like, you know, Oneida and Liars and all these sort of like experimental, you know, rock bands. You know, that was actually more of a draw culturally. And then like I got here and I'm like, oh whoa, there's like they're jams, they're bluegrass jams, awesome.
There's one almost every night here.
I know, wasn't every night when I moved here, but it was, you know, that's what I said, like the jamming scene has gotten better over the years.
So you run a jam the first of every Monday, or the first of every month?
I just, you know, got really creative and called it the First Monday Bluegrass Jam. You know, it does help people remember.
Must have put a lot of work into the name.
I know, this is a flash of inspiration. You know, came to me in a dream. I've been leading that, but I think since, I want to say 2005, that started at the Parkside Lounge, which used to be kind of one of the only bluegrass spots, and you know, they had bluegrass every Monday night, and so they had asked me to start hosting a monthly jam, and
nice.
And
I moved to Rockwood.
Because the Parkside moved away from doing bluegrass, and so we like took, you know, I don't know, 8 months off the jam, and then I started up at the Rockwood, so we've been there stage 3 ever since, and it's been consistently really well attended with musicians anyhow, and you know, other people come and watch and listen, which I'm always happy when they do. I don't understand why someone would attend a jam if they weren't participating, but people seem to like that one, you know. Mine's a little bit more of a kind of performance or open mic style jam rather than like a bunch of musicians sitting in a circle facing one another. So there's a microphone, soloists and singers are facing an audience. So there's it is very much a jam and not a performance, but it's kind of structured more like a performance. So it does allow people to kind of watch, and when you have people coming in, soloists coming in to the single mic, and there's all this like directing traffic that's like, I'm like always pointing to someone in the back of the room who's trying to hide in the corners, like, hey, take a break, and like okay, then they go up to them. So I guess it's maybe interesting to watch on that level, and we get some really good players and also beginners, and that's kind of part of what I strive for with that jam, is to like keep things as accommodating to as wide a range of players as I can. I know there are beginner jams, and then there's like Mona's, which is more of like a advanced and pro level jam, where they probably don't want to dump things down, but like I'm kind of trying to cover the entire gamut.
I've heard Andy Statman has been there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, talks about that.
Yeah.
So also at Rockwood you do a weekly Tuesday night show. How did that start?
Well, back when Rockwood opened up, which was I think in 2005 or 2006 or something, it was just stage one, just that one room. And I had a student who had the boutique next door in the space that's now stage 0. It's like this little sidebar.
Okay.
And she was like, hey, my friend, like the next business over me just opened up this music venue. You should play there. And I'm like, yeah, I'll check it out, whatever. And then anyways, I ended up like sitting in with some band. I got invited to sit in with some band that was playing there. I can't remember who it was now. And the booking person was there. They're like, oh, hey man, you sound good. You want to play here sometime? I'm like, yeah, sure, okay. And I think the first thing I did was like I set up like a monthly thing on Tuesdays. And we did monthlies for like 6 or 7 months, and then in December of 2006 I was like, hey, how about can I go weekly for like 2 months? And like I wanted to like feature different special guests each time, and then it ended up being fairly well attended, and they're like, hey, well, you want to keep this rolling? I'm like, okay, sure. And then now it's like 11 and a half years later, I've been
and it's every
Tuesday been doing it. So it's usually bluegrass. Although in the last several years, since my last record came out, which disc 2 is an electric record, so now the first Tuesday of every month I have the electric band, but the rest of the Tuesdays are bluegrass, and I'll maybe about a third of the time have people sit in, and sometimes they'll book other bluegrass related acts sometimes on the other side of me. So like Sam Ryder has done residencies, Roy Williams, and, they'll always be bringing in people like Alex Hargraves and Dominic Leslie and Jake Jolliffe, and
I've seen those live streams.
And I'm usually trying to snag one or more of them, to sit in. It's pretty informal. It's just a weekly thing. It's people aren't paying a ticket, so I feel pretty loose as far as I don't write a set list.
It's just whatever. Nice.
But it's good. It's good for, when I go through periods where I'm not doing a lot of performing, it keeps me engaged and in shape.
So as you said before, you have a record where half of it's bluegrass and the other side is more electric and experimental. What inspired you to make it half experimental?
Well, the record's called Orchids and Violence. It's a double, it came out like 2 or 3 years ago on Nonesuch. But I was trying to figure out like what kind of record I wanted to do. I mean, in one sense, like sort of made sense for me to do a straight ahead bluegrass record, but I also had been kind of working on all these other arrangements and kind of wanted to do something a little bit more experimental with the traditional material. And I was like talking to my wife about this. It's like I can't figure out like what makes sense for me to do next. What sort of record should this next one be? Do I just like play it down the middle and just do like a straight ahead record, or do I need that for at this point in my career, or should I be stretching the boundaries? It's like, well, why don't you do both? You should do 2 records, do the same songs, 2 different ways. I'm like, yes, that made total sense, because that freed me up to like just be very straight ahead, bluegrass, you know, tradition-wise on one record, and then also freed me up to like go in a totally different direction. You know, I didn't want to end up with lukewarm water.
Yeah.
So, and then it instantly started like kind of seeing all the potential, like the creative potential for like how the songs on the 2 records, which, and it's the same songs in the same order on the 2 records, so just kind of you know, challenging myself to like come up with like very different sort of arrangements and flow. So like, you know, like if one song was kind of up tempo on one record, it might be down tempo on another. You know, so like they're, you know, it's not like just adding electric instruments and drums to bluegrass songs, but really trying to kind of tell a different story with the same material. So that became the sort of the creative thrust, you know. And also we were like, where I was talking about at the beginning, you know, the thing about these, you know, the old songs, it's, I mean, that's part of what I like about them, is that, you know, like people have been singing, you know, variations on June Apple or whatever, probably for how many hundreds of years, I don't know, you know. I mean, it's probably lost to the sands of time who wrote that, but like, you know, but the fact that, you know, people in like many different times and places sing that and like relate to it somehow, and so I think that is part of the one of the fascinating things about the tradition, is just the adaptability of these songs. And so it was sort of rather than like trying to like be iconoclastic, I mean, I saw it really as, in a way, like kind of honoring the adaptability and the versatility of these songs, like, you know, that you know, they you know, can exist in so many different forms and in so many different, you know, styles and feels and aesthetic treatments, but it's like, you know, but it's kind of a testament to like how the songs endure, at least the good ones.
Yeah. Okay, so you talked a bit about this earlier, but you did a duo with Chris Thile for a while. How did you start that? How did you meet him?
Well, as I mentioned, Chris and I met just at this jam session at Sheriff Uncle Bob's Jam, you know, before he even moved here, and we just hit it off, just playing traditional music. I mean, we both grew up with traditional music and have like a, you know, it's like very much part of us foundationally, you know, like straight ahead bluegrass music. But, you know, we had both, you know, done a lot of different things with music, you know, certainly involving improvisation. Me more in the jazz realm, and him, you know, newgrass and, you know, whatever Nickel Creek is. This is before the Punch Brothers. But anyways, and so we just kind of hit it off because like it kind of enabled us to both engage in this tradition that was very much a part of us, but like since we both improvise and, you know, we were, things would just kind of can turn on a dime and kind of just totally dismantle a song on the fly and like have like all this weird stuff happen and then kind of come back to the traditional thing. So I mean, I think that, you know, for him, I've heard him talk about it a little bit, that it's kind of helped him access this part of his, you know, background, which he had like spent a lot of time trying to get away from. Like he didn't want to be pigeonholed as like a traditional bluegrass mandolin player. He, you know, had bigger fish to fry. But I think how we approach bluegrass, I think for him probably helped him, you know, access to all this stuff that's very much a part of him, but like in a way that still had a lot of kind of openness and flexibility. And for me, you know, I sort of like was coming back to bluegrass kind of hardcore, but like had this whole background in like jazz and experimental music, which I was kind of like really trying hard to kind of keep out of bluegrass. Like I didn't want to like have my style be like a you know, like a, you know, a mashup of like a bunch of different things and like be too eclectic. So I was just kind of interested in playing like very kind of you know, straight ahead, you know, kind of trying to play bluegrass music that's going for the jugular and, you know, not like involve all this fancy hoo-ha and whatnot. But it's like a lot of that stuff ended up coming out in a way that kind of felt fairly organic, and so playing with him helped me kind of access kind of like a whole gamut of musical experience, and kind of show kind of aspects of my musical sensibilities that don't often come out when I just play straight bluegrass. So and we enjoyed singing together, and we're friends, and it just kind of worked out, and it was definitely kind of the most raw project that Chris ever put out.
Yeah.
Kind of thrashy.
Alright, I think this is the last question I have, but do you have any like standout experiences or moments that happened, I guess, playing? Or, yeah.
Like here in New York, or just
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can answer that, like just kind of for talking about like the New York scene and the jamming scene. I'll choose to focus in that direction, but like there was at the Baggett Inn, like in those early days when Chris had just moved to New York, he and I would meet up down there, and at that time Mark O'Connor was also in New York, and there was at least one night where they were both there.
Wow.
And just jamming, and like Mark had Jeremy Kittle with him, who at that moment I think was a student and just like gone on to be a fantastic violinist and composer. But anyway, so like you had like, and Greg Gehring may have been there. I mean, I know like Chris and Greg were there at the same time. I'm not sure if Chris, Greg, and Mark were there at the same time, but definitely I'm thinking particularly of like this jam of like Mark O'Connor and Chris Thiele and Jeremy Kittle, and then like some students that had like just started playing their instruments 2 months ago.
Wow.
And just everyone was playing, whatever, Roll Must Be Baby's Arms, and it's just being like, this is the sort of thing that kind of happens within bluegrass and in New York.
Yeah.
It kind of accommodates everybody, and everyone's just kind of coming together. These world-class musicians and these like rank beginners all just kind of coming together over this body of music, and having this musical interaction with one another. So I think that was a memorable moment. And then as jams get really cacophonous, and like everyone plays too loud and you can't hear each other. And then as soon as like it would get around to Chris Thiele, and he played really quietly, and everyone would get really quiet. Chris Thiele played. He played this like shredding solo, and then as soon as he was done, everyone would go back to strumming too loud. But those sorts of dynamics, like those are things you only get in bluegrass music. I don't know of like any other style of music where that sort of thing happens, where you have these kind of world-class performers just jamming with and just like hanging out and like a social musical setting, with beginners and just like whoever happened to walk in off the street.
Yeah. Well, that's a good jam to be at then.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, thank you for talking to me.
Okay, great.
Bye.